About a week ago, I uploaded a video about Adam 22 of the No Jumper podcast, and I briefly mentioned DJ Vlad, or VladTV, as he is sometimes known. Both Adam 22 and DJ Vlad are known as fixtures in the rap community, as well as white people that have been able to sort of put themselves into the community and cultivate a following among both white and black listeners of the music. And what I was arguing with that video is they are also two white men that have questionable relationships with and behavior towards black men. Whenever DJ Vlad or Adam 22 cultivate friendships with what they perceive to be black men with a lot of street credibility, they are perceiving that friendship as more or less a business relationship, a set of business transactions, while the black men that they're cultivating are actually seeing these friendships and relationships as true friendships based upon mutual loyalty. In this video, what I want to talk about is something that is not maybe specific to DJ Vlad, but it's something that I've been noticing in rap journalism for a long time, pretty much from the very beginning. I mean, I've been interested in the music for, ever since I was a teenager, pretty much as soon as I turned, technically, I guess 13 is when you become a teenager. And that's when I really started intensifying in this habit of mine. And one thing I've noticed from the very beginning is it was actually pretty rare to find discussions of the actual music in this journalism. And at the time, it was kind of strange to me. As I grew older, I started to understand why that was. There was always this extreme emphasis on the personal backgrounds of the rappers, of the street credibility of the rappers. Right now, if you just take a look at some of the biggest interviews that DJ Vlad has done, listening to his interviews with this one rapper, Casanova, or Casanova 2X. In his interview with Casanova, who is a Brooklyn rapper from Flatbush, he grew up as very much as a hardened criminal. It came out that actually the FBI, eventually when they brought RICO charges against Casanova and his gang, they were actually sort of tapping some of these interviews to get additional information. One thing that immediately alarmed me about the interview is, despite sitting down something for like an hour or whatever it was, there was barely any actual discussion of music. It was just sort of getting into all the details of this guy's crime sprees, both in the past as well as, I guess, it turned out to be in the present as well. Talking about, again, back to the background, back to the street credibility, back to essentially creating a spectacle, not only for white people watching all this, but also a spectacle for a large percentage of black men, black women that maybe they're around some of this stuff in their own lives, but perhaps don't actually live that life, right? There's definitely this spectacle quality to rap music that does not exist in other genres. And to the extent that it's going to continue to be intertwined with people's personal backgrounds, I don't think that's going to change. But I think people should ask themselves, why is it that in the majority of these interviews, whether it's The Breakfast Club or whether it's DJ Vlad or even stuff like Adam 22, although he's a little maybe less guilty of this, why is it that the music is never actually part of the equation? Why is the music not part of the line of questioning? Why isn't the music something that actually matters? I mean, ostensibly, the reason why they're there is not simply because these are guys with an interesting sort of like checkered past or whatever. I think the easy answer, and an answer that isn't necessarily wrong, is along the lines of, well, the spectacle matters and people are interested in the spectacle. White people especially are interested in the spectacle. But I think that is too easy of an answer. I think a larger part of all this resides in the fact that, just generally speaking, the rappers and the journalists and everybody else essentially involved, they have a kind of agreement. Maybe it's an unspoken agreement. Maybe they're not even conscious of this. If they're involved in an industry like rap, which is so based around personalities. It is so based around what you are able to talk about in terms of like your own personal biography. If this is how things go, and this is simply, you know, market demands, and this is how people that are watching this, like, they've been sort of trained to understand rap as not only combat between craft and a lack of craft, right? I mean, very often, right, you have rap battles that are very focused on who is able to deliver the better lines. But if the audience is trained to essentially view rap as also a battle of these kinds of personalities, it means that the market will respond accordingly. People will respond accordingly. And I remember I first noticed this back in the 2000s when I was in high school. Everybody around me, black and white, they suddenly became very, very interested in this rapper, 50 Cent, who, this was before he became famous. He was still underground, but there was all this talk. Eminem is interested in him. Dr. Dre is interested in him. This is somebody that's going to have like a lot of sort of power and wealth, and, you know, essentially like a big market behind him. So they were listening to the mixtapes, and they kept repeating things like, oh, the reason why he's worthy of our attention is the fact that look at how far he's able to come strictly through mixtape releases. And I guess he had like some innovations on this front. I don't know, you know, I'm not like an expert or whatever on the economics of rap, but maybe there were some innovations on that front. But they were all discussions, of the business acumen of 50 Cent, but secondarily, they were also identifying the fact that because 50 Cent is somebody that is very much from the streets. He grew up as a drug dealer. I believe his mother died in a fire when he was young, went over to live with his grandmother, started selling drugs early on, was in jail. There's like mugshots of him when he's young, that sort of thing. And in his neighborhood, there was another guy, Ja Rule, who was at that point maybe behind Eminem, maybe the second or third most famous rapper at the time. And Ja Rule would often talk about his own kind of personal biography and crime and the streets, and it was primarily bullshit. And 50 Cent, by being from his neighborhood, he was discussing it essentially as bullshit. And this brought a ton of attention to him. And at the same time, it really kind of stalled Ja Rule's career in rap, right? Which is, again, this is a fascinating phenomenon. This is not something that you would necessarily see in other genres, right? I mean, like, first of all, the vast majority of pop music is not even written by the pop artists. If they talk, you know, if they sort of have like a faux attachment to the country life, like Taylor Swift or whatever, who I believe she's from Pennsylvania or something, I mean, it's not going to matter, right? It's just kind of like an aesthetic. So none of that actually matters in the vast majority of arts and music. And rap, because it has a completely different source, it tends to matter a lot. But at the time, I was also extremely interested in rappers like Mos Def, who had the classic album 1999, Black on Both Sides. The Black Star album, a lot of like early Nas from 1994 and whatnot. And I would tell these people, like, okay, I see why you're making the arguments that you're making for 50 Cent, but shouldn't you be interested primarily in just the music, in just the lyrics, and just exactly what you could hold? And I was approaching it very much as a white person. I never had to deal with things like street credibility or deal with that kind of importance. So when it came time to music, or when it came time later on to poetry or whatever, I was not interested in the aesthetic. I was interested in seeing whether or not it was good, valuable art, whether or not it was well crafted. So I became more interested in a purer kind of expression. And yet, you know, it's just like looking around. It was an argument that I was not losing, I guess, in a technical way, but I was losing that argument in terms of what eventually became popular. And I've actually softened quite a bit when it comes to personalities like 50 Cent, and maybe 50 Cent in particular. Although I'm still not a fan of his music, I see the way that he has totally transformed himself from a essentially a street criminal to somebody who was able to make it big in rap, to someone that is just like a very talented internet troll. He's constantly picking fights with people. He's pretty much always winning the fights with people. You even see this early on in the music, right? He had songs about robbing rappers, right? Which was kind of it's kind of a courageous thing to do if you think about it, right? These are things that people get shot over. He himself was shot. And he's releasing music kind of like, it's fun music. It's not like he's going to seriously do it. And I see how over the last 20 or so years, the landscape for people to do any kind of creative work, whether it's truly creative or just kind of creative in name only, people that do creative type of work have to deal with a totally different marketplace. They need to do podcasts. They need to do things that are attention seeking, both in positive and negative ways. They have to have this kind of like a presence that is everywhere all at once. And he was able to capitalize on that, and a lot of his experiences growing up, they sort of formalized that for him. They gave him the tools to be able to be successful in that way. So that part, I think, is interesting to see, like, as an adult looking back, right? I sort of see in a more kind of complex web how all of that led to where we are now. But back to the music. What I would ask is this something that's actually healthy to the art world and to rap music in particular? Again, to go back to the Taylor Swift example, or like whatever else similar in that vein, I'm not making the argument that being totally inauthentic, being totally someone that's kind of like a media creation is a good thing, or it's fine, or it's not a problem, right? I think it is obviously problematic. The greatest art in the world, there's absolutely a kind of authenticity there that at the very least, right, even if it's not authenticity in the way that it's typically thought of it in rap or whatever, it's an authenticity that is based on the idea that if I write a poem or I write a novel or I write anything, it's going to be very distinctly me, right? This is at the highest level possible, right? You're not going to confuse a Walt Whitman with some other poet. I remember in college, there was a Sylvia Plath poem that was presented to us in a class, and it was a poem of hers that I've never read, and I did not know that it was a Sylvia Plath poem, right? It was presented without a title and also without a name. But immediately, without ever having read it, I raised my hand. I was like, oh, I know right away that this is Sylvia Plath. And that's because she's very distinctive, and that's the way that great art ought to be. On the other hand, rap is extremely self-reflexive, very self-referential, very elusive in that regard, much more dependent upon contextual information. Like, one thing that's very noticeable is when you look back on rap from the 90s and whatnot, it is full of pop cultural references that are mostly unknown at this point. And these are references that are probably never going to get resurrected, right? It's bad movies at the time that maybe were cult classics for like a year or two and are totally forgotten. There's references to other music, other rappers, many of whom are just sort of like unknown. They kind of fell by the wayside. They're probably not going to get resurrected in the collective memory. So by being so context driven, it creates, unfortunately, a kind of shelf life for rap that is probably shorter than a lot of other music, right? And this is all based on essentially where it comes from. Now, when I got interested in rap, it was along the lines of, I understood right away that there were people with talent and people without talent. I want to understand what makes something work, why a certain line works or a song works, and eventually this fed into my interest in literature and the kinds of stuff that you see on this channel. And when I look at DJ Vlad or Adam 22 or these other personalities, and even like the rappers that they interview, it is all based on one thing only, which is aesthetics. They are strictly interested in the aesthetics. In this scenario, that aesthetics is something that has much more to do with personal preference, right? Pushing your own desires onto the world, right? DJ Vlad and both Adam 22 are kind of a problem in this regard, because there's not really a very obvious distinction between personal preference in terms of music as well as in terms of personalities in this kind of, you know, white spectacle, right, towards black life. There's not much of a distinction between that and the art itself, which is going to be a problem, right? If this is going to be an art form that is meant to compete with the world at large, because this is, I mean, where I am. I'm interested in these other art forms because I want there to be a competition with the world at large. I always wanted to see rap at the level where it's able to go toe-to-toe with the greatest songwriting, you know, in the history of the genre, whether it's the Russian and Soviet bards that I'm translating on this channel and on the automaticnation.com website, whether it's, you know, the best of pop innovations or rock innovations, the best poetic lyrical writing from people like Jim Morrison of The Doors. I always wanted to see this thing, which to me like felt kind of native, or like, wow, I grew up with this, right? This is kind of my childhood. And growing up, you often hear things like, you know, you're from nowhere. You're not really here to amount to anything. Just join what everybody else is doing. Don't try to think too hard. Don't try to go much further. Don't try to be more than what everybody else is doing. And rap became associated with a rebellion against all this. It's a rebellion against a cookie cutter kind of existence and cookie cutter desires. So I've always wanted to see it compete at the highest level possible, right? I wanted songs that would outlast decades and centuries and not just sort of die off when the pop cultural references are no longer there. But at this point, market dynamics rule. The marketplace demands rule. And DJ Vlad, Adam 22, the rappers that they interview, they're all in on essentially maximizing this attention. Things are getting more and more competitive, right? This is true of absolutely any field. More people are on YouTube than ever. More people are on Patreon than ever. More people are trying to be media personalities or TikTok stars. More people are trying to be rappers than ever before. So it's extremely competitive. Attention is rare. Attention is hard to come by. Attention is difficult to acquire. And because of this difficulty, whenever you are able to do it, whether it's by the fact that entrenched interests exist, such as DJ Vlad, you're going to have rappers like Casanova who are very much from the street mentality and also just kind of, you know, survival essentially at any cost. But things are getting more competitive and more difficult. And it's very easy to look at types like DJ Vlad and start blaming the white man, because the white man is simply there to encourage some of these bad tendencies. And these are bad tendencies that aren't just specific to rap, right? One of the reasons why I was attached to rap is when I looked at the white world of art, poetry, literature, painting, there was this very sick emphasis on everything is all equally valid and perfectly valid. Everything is equal. There is no greater than, less than when it comes to the arts. And seeing that this was not at all the case in rap, it was very much refreshing. But those mistakes that the white world is making and has been making and will continue to make when it comes to the arts, that is now getting replicated in the black community. And it's being replicated simply because those are just the demands of the market. But we've always had, right, essentially these kinds of like a groupthink scenarios. Like the Source magazine was one of them, right? The Source magazine that is well known for things like They're reviews that very rarely get the 5 mic rating, right? 5 mics being the highest rating that you can get. And it also like becomes a kind of cartel. Like everybody wants to be a taste setter, a taste maker. Everybody wants to be on top with their own preferences, because people view their personal preferences and their personal way of growing up, their personal experiences, as something that is just purely an extension of themselves. And when you view art as nothing more than an extension of yourself, you start to lose the fact that there is an objectivity, a wider objective world. That is supposed to be your playpen, right? That is supposed to be the thing that allows you to test yourself against reality, to see whether or not your craft is actually worthwhile. If you're not willing to do that, you're not really going to be in a situation where you have any kind of real longevity, right? And this is kind of the saddest part. When DJ Vlad is just interviewing rappers and he's just asking about drugs and he's asking about crime and he's asking about everything other than the music, this just continues to ghettoize rap, right? It continues to keep it in a purely sort of reflexive, context-driven environment. It does not allow it to break out and to become part of the wider culture. DJ Vlad is someone that very much fears failing in the white world, right? He's able to sort of like talk to black men about their experiences and their criminal past or even their criminal present, because white men would not actually do that, would they, right? If he's just interviewing, let's say, mafia bosses or whatever, they wouldn't be so free in their kind of information, right? Because again, it's just a different set of experiences, right? A mafia boss does not necessarily need the attention, but if you're a rapper and you're still in the street life, you still need that attention. You're still part of this command attention economy. And what happens is you have a pathological white man who feels insufficient in the wider culture, who feels insufficient in any other category other than the hip-hop world, which he identifies with like a lower culture, right? To him, it's easier to compete in there. To him, it's easier to make a reputation in there. I mean, like, just think about the fact that just based on like just not being able to ask any real questions about music in a way that is, you know, in any way insightful or anything like that. But, and I said this in the previous video, when black men and white men get together, something fascinating starts to happen. There is a mutual affection that develops. There is a mutual fascination that develops, and it's a fascination that is not always very healthy. The white man is interested in the black experience because it is so exotic and other to him, and he's able to orientalize it. The black man is interested in what seems like respectability, what seems like power, what seems like, in some cases, it could even be confused with true insightfulness and true talent. I'm still blown away to this day when I watch interviews with black rappers about Eminem, how much respect Eminem gets. Despite the fact that, to me, I mean, just looking at Eminem, he just seems like a geeky white rapper who just sort of like built his reputation on his own kind of special category of pathologies, and not really like, I mean, to this day, like when he's releasing albums, he still sounds as angry and trying to prove something as he did when he was 25, right? And he's a 50-year-old man now, and he's still just stuck in a purely kind of self-referential, reflexive world. But there's this kind of fascination between black and white that is not always very healthy, does not always play out in healthy ways. And in fact, given, you know, the context that we grew up in, we are in a segregated world, it's not going to be very healthy. I mean, I'm just, and I think eventually it will happen. It will happen that rap breaks out of its kind of purely reflexive categories. I think it will eventually compete with the art world in the same way that, you know, something like video games, right? Video games are almost like universally right now just like very silly, you know, button mashing exercises that don't really amount to anything. They are just kind of like a childish waste of time. But there's nothing about video games that, if you could give them decades or a century or whatever time that's required, there's nothing about that mode of media that prevents it from being great art. in league with so much other great art. Now, you know, maybe the kinds of games that would be true works of art in the future aren't going to be the things that we normally associate with gaming, but still, you know, like all these things they develop, and I think rap is going to be that category as well, right? There's nothing to prevent that from being the case. But until that happens, we're going to have white people and black people, again, Breakfast Club is part of this, DJ Vlad, everybody, the entire media ecosystem. They're kind of like parasites on this grander economy. And you also have the rappers themselves that are trying to survive, that recognize how competitive and difficult everything is. And this is why we're in this kind of like prolonged stasis. This is why DJ Vlad does not have an actual interest in the music. And this is why music journalism is still so obsessed with personalities, right? Personalities sell. And at a certain point, I become less and less willing to view those involved in the rap side as victims. They are very willing to become tools in this way. They're very willing to find a place where they fit in the marketplace. They're very willing to do anything and everything totally counterfactual and countervailing to the arts. And the unfortunate reality is this puts them in the same kind of decrepit, decaying category that I once and still do associate with white art and white assumptions about art, and the total lack of stakes when it comes to white art. The stakes in white art are those of whether or not maybe you could live off of it, whether or not you could secure a professorship, whether or not you get invited to the right parties. That is not the art that I want to be associated with, and that's not the art that I produce or the artists surrounding Automachination as well as Cosmoetica are trying to produce. So I'm not very willing to view many of these rappers that just very knowingly, even if it's half knowingly, subject themselves to this and ensure that the rap world continues being in this kind of static, reflexive mess. And this is my answer to why DJ Vlad does not really ask questions about music, and also why the musicians that he interviews also seem to be not so interested in answering questions about music. I have a video coming up pretty soon with Keith Jackowicz into the movie Macro, so look out for that. We're gonna do another walk and talk together, so Central Park probably. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you soon.